When one of the biggest movie stars in the entire world showed up to his own premiere, the night he had worked 4 years for, the night thousands of fans had traveled from different countries just to catch a glimpse of him, a security guard put his hand up and said, "Stop." Not because he was being mean, not because he was trying to cause trouble, because he was doing his job, because someone had told him to check everyone, and he was taking that seriously. See, and the face walking toward him was so famous that his brain refused to process it fast enough. And so, Keanu Reeves, the man whose name was printed in giant letters on the poster hanging directly above the door, stood outside his own premiere in the cold Berlin air, while cameras clicked and fans went silent and the whole world held its breath. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He didn't say, "Do you know who I am?" He just stood there, completely still, and with his hands open at his sides and his face patient and kind. And that was somehow the most powerful thing of all. The footage traveled around the world before morning. Millions of people watched it. Millions of people felt something in their chest they couldn't quite name. But here is the thing. Here is the part that nobody knew yet. Not the fans behind the barriers, not the photographers with their fingers frozen on their shutter buttons, not even the young security guard standing there with the heaviest clipboard of his life. What was about to happen next, what walked out of that front door 30 seconds later, was only the surface of the story. Underneath it was a secret. A quiet, carefully hidden truth that a 17-year-old girl sitting alone in a school computer lab 6 weeks later would accidentally uncover. A truth that would change the shape of the entire night the moment you understood it. A truth that would reach from a Los Angeles office in December all the way to a parking structure in Hollywood, to a hospital notice board in Ghana, to a desk drawer in a small Bavarian village, to the wallet of a woman who carried 3 words folded soft at the creases for years. And when that truth finally surfaced, when the real story behind the red carpet and the raised hand and the CEO who walked out into the cold finally came to light, it didn't just explain what happened that night. See, it explained everything. Stay with me for the whole video, because I promise you, by the time we reach the end of this story, you are going to feel something you were not expecting to feel today. And you are never going to look at a closed door quite the same way again. The night of March 6th, 2023, was supposed to be perfect. Berlin's Zoopalast Cinema had been dressed up like a crown jewel. One of the oldest and most beautiful movie theaters in all of Europe. It sat on the corner of Hardenbergstrasse like something out of a dream. Gold light pouring from its windows, red carpet stretching from the sidewalk all the way to the front doors like a river of velvet. Camera flashes popped against the cold German night air like tiny lightning storms. Fans pressed 6 and 7 deep against the metal crowd barriers, screaming and waving and crying happy tears. Above the theater's grand entrance, 4 enormous words blazed in white against the dark sky. John Wick. Chapter 4. This was it. 4 years of work. Thousands of hours of training. Broken fingers, bruised ribs, and stunts so dangerous that the crew held their breath every time the cameras rolled. A movie that people had been waiting for since 2019. And then waiting longer because a global pandemic had pushed it back and back and back again. Tonight, finally, it was here. And at the center of all of it, one man, Keanu Reeves. He arrived without a massive entourage. No fleet of armored cars. No wall of personal bodyguards shoving photographers aside. Just Keanu, in a simple black suit, his long dark hair brushed back from his face, walking up the red carpet the way a man walks, when he is genuinely grateful to be somewhere. He stopped for every fan he could reach. He signed things. He held phones up for selfies with a steadiness that most people lose after their first big movie. And he smiled the kind of smile that no publicist could manufacture. The kind that starts somewhere deep behind the eyes and works its way out slowly, like sunlight coming through a curtain. The crowd loved him for it. They always did. But when Keanu reached the entrance of Zoopalast and stepped toward the main door, when he was close enough to feel the warm air from inside spilling out onto his face, something happened. A large hand appeared in front of his chest. "Sure, sir." The voice was firm and professional. "I need to see your credentials." The hand belonged to a security guard named Marcus Bryle, 26 years old, wide shoulders, a curly wire running from his left ear down into his collar. He was 3 weeks into his apprenticeship with the security firm, and he was taking every second of it seriously. His clipboard was tucked under his arm. His eyes were steady. He had been told by his supervisor to check every single person at Gate 3. And that was exactly what he intended to do. Keanu stopped walking. He looked at the hand in front of him. Then he looked at Marcus. "I'm sorry," Keanu said. His voice was calm. It was always calm. "Your badge or your invitation, sir? You need to show something to enter." A strange hush moved through the nearest section of the crowd. Not a silence exactly, but a shift. Like when wind changes direction and you feel it on your skin before you understand what it means. Photographers lowered their cameras and raised them again. Fans turned to each other with wide eyes. The screaming softened into something more like murmuring. Because the man standing outside that door was not a gatecrasher. He was not a fan who had slipped past the barriers. He was the reason every single person inside that building had shown up tonight. He was the star of the film. He was John Wick, and he could not get inside his own premiere. Keanu did not argue. He did not raise his voice. And he did not reach for a phone or snap his fingers at someone nearby. He simply stood on the red carpet, perfectly still, while the whole strange moment hung in the cold Berlin air around him. And dozens of cameras began clicking at once, louder and faster than before. Whatever happened next was going to travel around the world before morning. But to understand why it mattered so deeply, to understand why millions of people who watched that footage felt something twist inside their chests, you first had to understand who the man standing outside that door actually was. Not the movie star, not the legend, the man underneath all of that. Keanu Charles Reeves was born on September 2nd, 1964, in Beirut, Lebanon. His father was Hawaiian and Chinese. His mother was English. His childhood was not a clean, straight line moving forward. It was a zigzag, full of upheaval and new cities and new schools and new stepfathers who came and went. His parents divorced when he was 3 years old. After that, he moved with his mother and younger sisters through Sydney, then New York, then Toronto, never quite settling anywhere long enough to feel like it was home. He struggled in school. He was diagnosed with dyslexia. Words on a page moved around on him, rearranged themselves, refused to cooperate. In a classroom, thought he was often the boy in the back who wasn't keeping up. And he knew it. And it cost him something quietly, year after year. But he loved movies the way some kids love food, hungrily, completely. Like it was keeping something alive inside him that nothing else could reach. He would sit in dark theaters and feel whatever was tight and knotted in his chest slowly loosen. The stories on screen didn't care that he read slowly. They didn't care that he had moved 6 times or that his family kept changing shape. They just showed him what a human being could be, what a human being could endure. what a human being could survive, and still choose to be kind at the end of it. He started acting as a teenager in Toronto. Small roles at first, a television commercial, a few lines in a forgettable film. But he kept going, kept showing up, kept saying yes to the next audition, even when the last one hadn't led anywhere. But he moved to Los Angeles. He slept on a friend's couch. He drove a beat-up car and ate cheap food, and auditioned and failed and auditioned again. Then came Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure in 1989. Then Point Break. Then Speed. Then, in 1999, The Matrix, a film that didn't just make him a household name, but rewired the way the world thought about action movies entirely. Success arrived, but it didn't change him. He lost his best friend River Phoenix outside a nightclub in 1993, and he carried that grief quietly. In 1999, his daughter Ava was stillborn. 8 months after that, her mother Jennifer Syme died in a car accident. These were losses so enormous that people who knew him worried the weight of them might finally break something permanent inside him. They didn't. He came back. He always came back. So on that red carpet in Berlin, when a young man with a clipboard raised his hand and said, "Stop," he wasn't just stopping a movie star, but he was stopping someone who had already survived more closed doors than most people would ever know. But Marcus Bryle didn't know any of that yet. Marcus had woken up that morning with a knot in his stomach that no amount of breakfast could fix. His supervisor at the security firm, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Dagmar Foss, had called him the evening before to confirm his assignment. Zoo Palast, John Wick premiere, red carpet entrance, gate 3, main door. Or you check everyone, Dagmar had told him, her voice leaving absolutely no room for misunderstanding. Everyone, Marcus. I don't care if the mayor of Berlin shows up without a badge. No credentials, no entry. Are we clear? They were clear. Marcus had grown up in a small town called Freken, just outside of Cologne. The kind of quiet place where nothing much happened, and everyone knew what their neighbor had eaten for dinner. His father drove a delivery van. His mother worked the morning shift at a bakery. They were good, solid people who believed in doing your job properly and not making a fuss. Marcus had grown up believing the same things. He had studied security and crowd management at a vocational college in Cologne for 2 years. He had done his placements carefully. He had passed every module. And now, 3 weeks into his apprenticeship with one of Berlin's most respected security firms, he had been handed the biggest assignment of his young career. He was not going to mess it up. When his shift started at 6 in the evening, Marcus took his position at Gate 3 with his clipboard pressed under his arm and his eyes moving steadily across every face that approached. He checked lanyards. He matched names to lists. He asked politely and firmly for credentials when they weren't immediately visible. He let people through one at a time, each clearance careful and deliberate. Then, at approximately 8:47 in the evening, a man walked toward him from the direction of the red carpet. No lanyard, no badge, no visible invitation, just a black suit and a face that Marcus recognized, but his brain refused to process quickly enough. That was the strange thing about famous faces in real life. They never looked quite the way you expected. On a screen, they were enormous, lit perfectly, larger than life. In person, they were just a person, same size as everyone else, the same cold air around them, same 2 eyes blinking in the flash of cameras. Marcus's training took over before his recognition could catch up. He raised his hand. "Sir, I need to see your credentials." What Marcus did not know, what nobody had bothered to tell him because the coordination between the red carpet team and the door team had broken down somewhere in the chaotic final hour of setup. was that Keanu Reeves was not carrying his badge. It was with his publicist, a woman named Dana Feldstein, who was 20 feet behind him on the carpet, caught in a conversation with an event coordinator that she couldn't gracefully exit. What Marcus also did not know was that a camera crew from an entertainment news outlet had their lens trained directly on Gate 3. And what Marcus absolutely did not know, could not have known, I could not have even imagined, was that a man inside the building was watching all of this unfold on a live security monitor from a room just beyond the lobby. That man was John Feldheimer, Chief Executive Officer of Lionsgate Entertainment. The man whose studio had spent years and tens of millions of dollars building the world of John Wick into one of the most successful action franchises on the planet. He had been sipping coffee and talking about reviews just moments ago. Now he was very still, staring at the screen, and he was already setting down his cup. But outside, on the red carpet, nobody knew that yet. Out at Gate 3, the 30 seconds that followed felt like a full minute to everyone watching. Time does that sometimes, stretches itself out when something important is happening, as if even the clock wants a better look. Keanu Reeves did not move dramatically. He did not throw his arms up or call out for someone to come and fix this. And he did not reach into his jacket for a phone or look over his shoulder with impatience. He stood in front of Marcus Braille, the way a man stands in front of a closed door when he has decided, somewhere deep inside himself, that he is simply going to wait. Calmly, without forcing anything. To his right, the fans pressed against the metal barriers had gone almost completely silent. Some of them had traveled enormous distances to be standing exactly where they were standing tonight. A 17-year-old girl named Sophie Maurer had come all the way from a small village in Bavaria with her father, Heinrich. She had been saving money from her weekend job at a flower shop for 4 months to afford the trip. She was holding a hand-drawn sign in red and black marker that read, "We love you, John Wick." The letters slightly uneven because she had drawn it herself at the kitchen table the night before, while her father pretended not to watch. And when she saw what was happening at Gate 3, her sign slowly lowered. "Papa," she whispered, gripping her father's sleeve. "Is that really happening?" Heinrich put his hand over hers. He was a quiet man, a secondary school geography teacher who had driven 4 hours to Berlin because his daughter had asked him to, and because he understood, without her having to explain it, that this mattered to her in a way that went beyond a movie. He looked at the man standing outside the door. He looked at the stillness in that man's body, the way his hands hung at his sides, loose, open, not clenched. "Yes," Heinrich said quietly. "It's really happening." 12 feet away from Sophie, a photographer named Piotr Ostrowski was standing beside the carpet for a Berlin entertainment outlet called Berliner Filmwelt. He had covered dozens of premieres. He had photographed politicians, musicians, directors, and actors across 15 years of work. He thought he had seen most things a red carpet could offer. His finger found his shutter button without him deciding to press it. The camera clicked anyway, over and over, capturing what his eyes were still trying to understand. Those photographs would be shared more than 1 million times before the week was out. Film critics and journalists and ordinary people online would study them carefully, zooming in on Keanu's profile. His chin tilted slightly downward, his jaw relaxed, his eyes looking directly at Marcus with an expression that everyone who examined those images agreed on, despite using different words to describe it. It looked like patience, and underneath the patience, just barely visible, something older and quieter. It looked like understanding. He was not angry at this young man blocking his path, not even slightly. And that, more than the absurdity of the moment, more than the cameras, It more than the crowd was what made people feel something unexpected rising in their throats when they watched the footage later. Inside Marcus Braille's chest, recognition had finally caught up with his eyes. The face in front of him was the face on the enormous poster mounted directly above Gate 3. He had walked past that poster 6 times tonight without thinking about it. Now it was standing in front of him in a black suit with its hands open and its eyes patient and kind. His clipboard had never felt so heavy in his life. His radio crackled sharply. Then his supervisor, Dagmar Foss, was in his ear, her voice pulled tight like a wire. "Marcus, that is the star of the film. You let him through. Right now." Marcus lowered his clipboard. He opened his mouth. But before a single word came out, before Marcus could apologize or step aside or find any way to make this moment smaller than it had already become, the front door of Zoo Palace swung open from the inside, and a man walked out. Not a runner sent to quietly smooth things over, not a junior publicist with a laminated badge and an apologetic smile, not anyone whose job it was to handle exactly this kind of situation from a safe and comfortable distance. John Feldheimer, Chief Executive Officer of Lionsgate Entertainment, walked through the front door of his own premiere, past the door staff, past the rope line, and directly toward Keanu Reeves. The cameras went off like a thunderstorm. Sophie Maurer grabbed her father's arm with both hands. Piotr Ostrovsky's shutter clicked so fast it sounded like a playing card in bicycle spokes. Every single person on that red carpet stopped moving. And then Jan Feldheimer did something that nobody in that crowd, nobody watching on monitors inside, nobody who would read about it the next morning over breakfast, could have predicted. He walked past Keanu Reeves entirely. Not to greet him, not to apologize to him, but not to shake his hand and steer him smoothly through the door while murmuring something reassuring into his ear. He walked past Keanu and went directly to Marcus Braille, the 26-year-old apprentice security guard from Frechen, who was currently standing at Gate 3 holding a clipboard like it was the only solid thing left in the world. The crowd went so quiet that people later said they could hear the traffic moving on Hardenbergstrasse behind them. But John Feldheimer was 68 years old in March of 2023. He had run Lionsgate Entertainment since the year 2000. Under his leadership, the studio had built The Hunger Games into a global phenomenon, had taken a chance on the first John Wick film when most of Hollywood thought a 50-year-old action star was a risky bet, and had shepherded the franchise through 4 films and nearly $1 billion in worldwide box office revenue. When he was a man who operated in boardrooms and on conference calls and at industry dinners where everything was measured and managed and carefully controlled. He was not a man who walked out of his own premiere to stand on a cold sidewalk in front of a crowd of strangers. But here he was. He stopped in front of Marcus. He looked at him directly. Not the way a powerful man looks at someone far below him on a ladder, but the way one person looks at another when they genuinely want to understand what they are seeing. His voice, when he spoke, was not raised. People nearby strained to hear it. Later, a German entertainment journalist named Clara Steinberg, who had been positioned just 8 feet away, reported what she had managed to catch of the exchange in her piece for Süddeutsche Zeitung the following morning. Feldheimer had said something close to this. "You did your job tonight. Like you followed your instructions exactly the way you were supposed to. That is not something to be ashamed of. That is something to be respected." He paused. Then he said, "But this man built everything you see around you tonight. Every camera, every light, every person standing behind those barriers came here because of him. So let's make sure he feels that." Then John Feldheimer turned around. He walked to the front door of Zoo Palace. when he reached out his hand, not to press a button or signal a doorman, but to physically grip the door handle himself. And he pulled it open, wide open. And he stood there holding it, looking back at Keanu Reeves with an expression that said, without any words at all, that this was not a formality. This was not a gesture arranged for the cameras. This was one person choosing to show another person that they were valued. Genuinely, completely, without any asterisk attached to it. The crowd behind the barriers broke open with noise. Not polite applause. Not the rehearsed cheering that happens at organized events when someone signals the audience to react. This was a raw, sudden, fully human sound. The kind that erupts out of people when something unexpectedly decent happens right in front of their eyes, and their hearts respond before their minds can catch up. Sophie Maurer was crying before she even realized she had started. She pressed her hand-drawn sign flat against her chest, like she was trying to hold something inside herself that was in danger of spilling out completely. Her father, Heinrich, put his arm around her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would have added anything to what they were both feeling. Piotr Ostrowski's hands were shaking. He kept shooting anyway. Keanu Reeves stood on the red carpet and looked at the open door, and then he did something that made the noise from the crowd get even louder. He didn't walk through it. Not yet. He turned back toward Marcus Breil. He walked the 4 steps between them, back toward the man who had stopped him, back toward the clipboard and the curly earpiece wire, and the face that was still cycling through emotions too fast to settle on any single one. Keanu extended his right hand. Marcus looked at it for just a half second. The smallest pause. The pause of a young man who cannot quite believe this is his real life. And then he reached out and shook it. Keanu leaned in slightly. His lips moved. Nobody caught the words on camera. No microphone was close enough. The moment was too small and too private for the enormous night surrounding it. But something passed between them in those 4 words. Something that traveled from one person to the other and landed somewhere it was clearly needed. Then Keanu straightened up. He nodded once at Marcus. He turned back toward the door, and he walked through it, into the warmth and the light and the noise of his own premiere. While behind him, Marcus Breil stood very still on the sidewalk, holding his clipboard in hands that had forgotten what they were supposed to be doing. Inside, the screening of John Wick. Chapter 4 received a standing ovation that lasted 4 full minutes. Critics called it a masterpiece. The crowd cheered until their voices gave out. But the most important moment of that entire night had already happened outside, in the cold, in front of a crowd of strangers, in the space of 4 quiet words that nobody had managed to record. And the full meaning of those words, the reason they mattered as much as they did, the secret buried underneath the entire evening, was something that nobody in that crowd knew yet. Nobody except one man, the one who had just walked through the door. But secrets, even quiet ones, so have a way of finding light eventually. 6 weeks after the Berlin premiere, on a gray Tuesday morning in mid-April, a 17-year-old girl from a small Bavarian village called Poling was sitting alone in her school's computer lab while the rest of her class was at lunch. The room smelled like warm electronics and old carpet. Rain tapped against the windows in an uneven rhythm. Sophie Maurer had her chin resting in her hand and her eyes fixed on a laptop screen, to doing what she had been doing almost every evening since March 6th, going back to that night, again and again, turning it over like a stone she kept finding in her pocket. She had watched the videos dozens of times. She had read every article she could find in both German and English, running the ones she couldn't fully translate through an online tool and reading the results slowly and carefully. She had printed out one of Piotr Ostrowski's photographs, the one that had traveled furthest online, the profile shot of Keanu standing at Gate 3 with his hands loose at his sides, and taped it to the wall above her desk at home between a map of Europe and a postcard her grandmother had sent from Vienna 3 years ago. She looked at that photograph every morning when she woke up. It wasn't the fame that held her attention. Sophie had loved the John Wick films since her older cousin had shown her the first one on a laptop when she was 14. But what she was trying to understand now had nothing to do with the movies. It had to do with something she had seen in real life, in person, on a cold night in Berlin, that she didn't yet have the right words for. Something about the way a person could be treated badly and choose, without any hesitation, not to become smaller because of it. When she had started researching Keanu Reeves the way you research something that genuinely puzzles you. Not collecting facts to repeat to other people, but digging for understanding. She found the stories that don't make front pages. The Matrix salary he had quietly distributed among the special effects and costume departments because he felt they deserved recognition that money could give them. The subway rides in New York where he gave up his seat without being asked. The umbrella he handed to a stranger in the rain outside a film festival and kept walking. The airport conversation that lasted 2 hours because a woman had recognized him through her tears, and he had simply stayed. None of these stories had come from him. They had all come from the other people involved, surfacing years later, offered up not as proof of anything, but as something the person felt compelled to share because it had changed something small inside them. She was building a picture. A careful, detailed, honest picture of a human being. And the picture that was emerging did not look like a celebrity. It looked like someone who had been through enough real darkness to understand, at a level deeper than thought, what it cost a person to feel invisible. Then, on April 18, 2023, Sophie opened a Vanity Fair article that had been published that morning. A long profile piece on John Wick, Chapter 4, written by a journalist named Kara Ellison. Sophie had been working through it slowly for 20 minutes when she reached a paragraph near the bottom of the piece that made her stop reading entirely. Kara Ellison had asked Keanu a simple question about the Berlin premiere. What was his favorite moment of the night? Keanu had paused for longer than the question seemed to require. Then he had said that the most meaningful part of the evening, for him, had been a brief conversation with a young security guard at the entrance. Kara had pressed him gently. What had they talked about? Keanu had smiled. Kara described it as the smile of someone sharing a joke that only made sense to them, and said only this: "He reminded me of why it matters that we show up." Kara had asked what he meant by that. Keanu hadn't answered the question directly. Instead, he said something else, and something that Kara Ellison had very nearly left out of the piece because it had arrived so quietly and so casually that she almost missed its weight entirely. He said, "I asked the security company to make sure some of the entry-level positions that night went to young first-timers, people who needed the work and the experience, people who wouldn't normally find themselves inside a night like that one." Sophie read the paragraph once. Then she read it again. Then a third time, more slowly, her finger trailing under each line as if she needed the physical contact to confirm that the words were actually saying what she thought they were saying. She sat back in her chair. The rain kept tapping at the window. Marcus Bryle, the young guard who had raised his hand and stopped Keanu Reeves at the door of his own premiere, the moment that had traveled around the world before morning, had been placed at Gate 3 without knowing it. Because the man he stopped had quietly asked for someone exactly like him to be given the chance to be there. Keanu Reeves had not simply endured the moment at the door. He had, in some way that Sophie was still struggling to fully hold in her mind, created it. She closed the laptop. She sat in the quiet of the computer lab for a long time. Around her, keyboards clicked, and the rain fell, and the ordinary world continued at its ordinary pace. Inside her chest, something was shifting into a position it had never quite occupied before. Then she opened the laptop again. She opened a blank document, and she began to type. Dear Mr. Reeves, my name is Sophie Maurer. I was standing at the barrier in Berlin on March 6th. I was holding a sign. I want to tell you what I think I understood about that night. And I need to ask you one question that I cannot stop thinking about. She would get a reply. It would arrive 43 days later, be handwritten on plain white paper with no letterhead and no return address. But first, there was one more piece of the story that needed to be told. The piece that had happened before any of them arrived on that red carpet. The piece that had started not in Berlin, but in a quiet office in Los Angeles, 3 months earlier, on a gray afternoon when nobody was watching. It was December 2022. The John Wick. Chapter 4, press tour was still being assembled, city by city, venue by venue, and in spreadsheets and email threads and conference calls between Lionsgate's events division and production coordinators across Europe. Berlin had been confirmed as the global premiere location, a deliberate choice because Zoopalast carried history inside its walls, and the John Wick team had always cared about that kind of thing. A Lionsgate event coordinator named Patricia Vance had flown to Los Angeles from New York to go through the European tour logistics with the key talent and their representatives. Patricia had been doing this work for 22 years. She was organized, experienced, and thorough in the way that people become thorough when they have personally witnessed what happens when details are missed at major events. She arrived at the meeting with a thick binder divided by city, each section color-coded, on each page laminated. The meeting was standard in almost every way. Schedules were confirmed. Hotel arrangements were reviewed. Press junket timings were adjusted. Patricia walked through the Berlin section with the careful efficiency of someone who had done this particular kind of work so many times that it had become a second language. Then Keanu asked a question that stopped her completely. And he had been flipping through the Berlin security staffing pages. The kind of pages that talent almost never looked at. The purely logistical background material that existed to be filed and forgotten. When he looked up and said simply, "Who are these people?" Patricia explained. The firm was well established in Berlin, reputable, experienced with large-scale events. They would staff the evening with their regular contractors, seasoned professionals who had worked premieres and concerts and political events across the city for years. Keanu looked back down at the pages. He was quiet for a moment, in the particular way that people are quiet when something is forming in their mind that they haven't yet decided whether to say out loud. Then he said, "Is there any way to request that some of the positions, particularly the lower-level door and gate roles, go to young people who haven't worked an event like this before? First-timers, people building their credentials from the ground up, people who could genuinely use both the experience and the income." Patricia looked at him across the table. She asked, carefully, "Why?" Keanu set the binder page down, and he looked at the window for a brief moment before he answered. The kind of pause that belongs to a person reaching back into something real rather than reaching forward into something prepared. "Because I remember very clearly what it felt like to need a job badly," he said. "And because I think nights like this one should belong to more people than just the ones who always get invited to them." Patricia wrote it down. She wasn't certain she could make it happen. Security firms had their own internal protocols and staffing hierarchies that didn't always bend easily to outside requests. But she made the calls. She asked the right questions. She discovered that the Berlin firm ran an apprenticeship track specifically designed to place young workers in credentialed, professional environments where they could build real experience. With careful coordination and a light touch, nobody was pressured, and nobody was displaced. 3 apprentice-level positions were folded into the Zoopalast staffing plan for the night of March 6, 2023. The firm's senior management was told only that the production company had expressed a preference for including junior placements as part of a broader youth employment initiative. No announcement was made. No press release was drafted. No social media post was planned. The request existed in a single line of an internal email between Patricia Vance and the firm's placement coordinator, buried in a chain of 40 other logistical details about lighting rigs and catering allergies and car park access. Nobody told the 3 apprentices anything special about why they had been chosen. Nobody told them that a famous man had quietly arranged for people like them to be given a seat at a table they would otherwise never have reached. Marcus Breil was one of those 3 young people. He had shown up on March 6th with his clipboard and his butterflies and his supervisor's voice in his ear telling him to check everyone, no exceptions. And he had done exactly that. He had done his job with complete sincerity, without any knowledge of the invisible hand that had placed him there. And the man that invisible hand belonged to had stood on the red carpet outside Gate 3 and said thank you to him for it. Not with irony, and not with theater, with the full and simple weight of someone who meant it entirely. By the end of 2023, Marcus Breil had completed his apprenticeship and accepted a full-time position with the firm. He had worked 16 events since Berlin. He was good at his job and getting better. On his desk, in a plain frame he had bought from a shop near his apartment, sat a photograph. A copy of Piotr Ostrowski's image from that night. The profile shot, the open hands, the patient face. And it had arrived at the firm's office in an unmarked envelope addressed simply to Marcus Breil, Gate 3. On the back, in plain, unhurried handwriting, 4 words had been written. Thank you for caring. Marcus didn't know with absolute certainty who had sent it. He had his suspicion. He kept it anyway, in the frame, on the desk, where he could see it every morning when he sat down to begin his shift. And when people asked him, as they often did, because the story had traveled far and it kept finding new people who needed to hear it, about the night he had stopped Keanu Reeves from entering his own movie premiere, Marcus always told it completely. The clipboard, the hand raised in the cold air, the handshake, the 4 words spoken quietly at the door. And then he told them the part that Sophie Maurer had found in a computer lab on a rainy Tuesday in April. The part that changed the shape of the whole story the moment you understood it. "'Tis he put me there," Marcus told the journalist from Der Tagesspiegel in the interview that would be translated into 17 languages and read by people in countries neither of them had ever visited. He said it simply, without drama, looking at the photograph on his desk. "The man I stopped at the door, he's the reason I was standing at that door in the first place." He paused. "I've thought about that a lot," Marcus said. "What kind of person does something like that and never tells anyone? What kind of person arranges to be treated that way? Stopped, questioned, made to wait outside in the cold, and then thanks the person who did it?" The journalist didn't answer. She didn't think she was supposed to. Marcus looked at the photograph for another moment. Then he said the last thing he said in that interview, the sentence that ended up in the headline, that ended up quoted in articles across Europe and beyond, and that ended up written on a piece of paper and taped above Sophie Maurer's desk in Poland, right next to the photograph and the map of Europe. and the postcard from Vienna. It felt, Marcus Briles said quietly, like being seen by someone who didn't have to see you. And that, in the end, was the whole story. Not the red carpet. Not the CEO walking out into the cold. Not the cameras or the crowd or the standing ovation inside a beautiful old theater on Hardenbergstrasse. The real story was a question asked quietly in a Los Angeles office in December. Asked not for credit, not for coverage, not for anything that could be weighed or measured or put in a press release. Asked simply because a man who had once needed a door opened for him understood, better than most, what it meant to be the one standing outside it. And 43 days after Sophie Maurer sent her letter, on a morning in early June 2023, at when the rain had finally stopped and the village of Poling was green and quiet, a reply arrived. Handwritten, plain white paper, no letterhead. She read it once. Then she folded it carefully and kept it in the drawer of her bedside table, where it has remained ever since. She has never told anyone what it said. Some doors, once opened, belong only to the person who walked through them. But sometimes, rarely, quietly, and in the way that only the most important things happen, a door opens in two directions at once. Sophie Maurer had not expected a reply. She had sent her letter on a Wednesday evening in late April, folded into a plain white envelope that she had addressed to Keanu Reeves, care of Lionsgate Entertainment's Los Angeles office, because it was the only address she could find that felt even remotely real. She had walked to the post box at the end of her village road in Poling alone, without telling her father, and pushed the envelope through the slot, and stood there for a moment, listening to it land softly somewhere inside the dark metal box. Then she had walked home and told herself, firmly and repeatedly, to forget about it entirely. She did not forget about it entirely. Every morning for the first 2 weeks, she checked the letterbox at the end of their garden path before her father had finished making breakfast. And then she stopped checking every morning and started checking every few days. Then she told herself she had moved on. Then she checked again. 43 days after she had dropped the envelope into the post box, on a Thursday morning in early June, when Poling was swimming in green summer light and the air smelled like cut grass and warm stone, Sophie came downstairs to find her father, Heinrich, standing in the kitchen holding a small envelope. See, he was looking at it with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not quite bewilderment. Something softer than that. Something closer to wonder, which was not an expression that geography teachers from small Bavarian villages typically wore before 7 in the morning. "This came for you," he said. He held it out. The envelope was plain white. No printed letterhead. No return address printed in the corner. Just her name and their home address, written by hand in plain, are unhurried letters that leaned very slightly to the right. The postmark was Los Angeles. The stamp was American. Sophie took it from her father. Her hands were completely steady, which surprised her. She had imagined this moment enough times that perhaps her body had already rehearsed its response and decided on calm. She sat down at the kitchen table. Heinrich quietly turned back to the stove and said nothing and did not look at her, which was one of the kindest things he had ever done. She opened the envelope carefully, without tearing it. Inside was a single sheet of plain white paper, folded in thirds. She unfolded it. The handwriting was the same as the envelope. Unhurried, slightly right-leaning, the handwriting of someone who had learned to write carefully and never saw a reason to rush it. She read it once, all the way through, without stopping. Then she set it flat on the table in front of her and looked out the kitchen window at the garden, where the morning light was doing something particularly generous to the roses her mother had planted along the back fence years ago. and that her father tended now with a quiet dedication he never spoke about directly. Heinrich put a cup of tea beside her elbow without being asked. She read the letter a second time. What it contained, the exact words, the specific things Keanu had written in response to her specific question, she has never shared publicly. Oh, she has been asked about it in the years since, because the story of the Berlin premiere continued to travel and continued to find new people. And eventually it found journalists who found Sophie, and Sophie was always willing to talk about the night itself, about her sign and her father's arm around her shoulders, and the moment the CEO walked through that door. But the letter she kept private. What she did share, once, in a short piece she wrote for her school's end-of-year magazine, and in the careful and precise German of a student who had always been better at feeling things than explaining them, was not what the letter said, but what it had done to her. She wrote that before Berlin, and before the letter, she had understood kindness as something people performed, a choice they made when it was easy or when someone was watching. She had believed this not because she was cynical, but because she was 17 and had seen enough of the world to notice that most people's goodness had conditions attached to it. Small print at the bottom, an asterisk that revealed itself eventually. She wrote that the letter had not changed her mind about this. Most people's kindness still had conditions. That was still true. But she wrote that the letter had shown her, in a way she could not fully explain, but could not unfeel either, and that some people had found a way to remove the asterisk completely. To be decent, not as a performance and not as a strategy, but as a simple and fundamental orientation toward the world. The way a plant turns toward light, not because it has decided to, but because that is the direction it has always understood as home. She wrote that she did not know if she was capable of that yet, but she wrote that she intended to find out. But her school magazine had a circulation of approximately 200 students, parents, and faculty members. It was not a publication that typically reached very far beyond the village of Poling. But her geography teacher, her father, Heinrich Maurer, who had driven 4 hours to Berlin and stood in the cold and put his arm around his daughter and said nothing because there was nothing to say, made a quiet copy of her piece. He kept it in his desk drawer at school, in a folder with no label. And sometimes, when a student sat across from him who seemed to be carrying something heavy and invisible and was not sure what to do with it, he would open the drawer. He would take out the copy. He would slide it across the desk without explanation and let them read it. He never told them who had written it. He just watched their faces while they read. And every single time, without exception, in all the years that followed, something shifted in those young faces partway through. Something loosened and rearranged itself into a shape that looked, just briefly, like the beginning of understanding, which was, in the end, all that any good story can honestly promise to do. Not to fix anything, not to resolve the hard and complicated mess of being a human being moving through a world that does not always move gently in return. Just to shift something, to loosen one thing that was tight, to show a person, for the length of a paragraph or a chapter or a single quiet sentence, that the experience they were carrying was not theirs alone, that somebody else had stood outside a closed door too. John Wick. Chapter 4 opened in cinemas worldwide on March 24, 2023, 18 days after the Berlin premiere. It earned $47 million in its opening weekend in North America alone. By the end of its theatrical run, it had collected over $400 million globally, making it by far the most successful film in the franchise. The critics placed it on their year-end best-of lists. Action choreographers studied it in master classes. Chad Stahelski who had directed all 4 films, was praised in terms that made the rest of Hollywood sit up and pay attention. Keanu Reeves did the full press tour. Every city, every interview, every red carpet, and he was present and warm and generous with his time in the way that people who have survived real loss often are. Understanding instinctively that time is not something to be rationed among only the important moments, but something to be given freely. Because you have learned the hard way that you never know which moment is going to turn out to matter most. He never spoke publicly about what had happened in December 2022 in that Los Angeles office with Patricia Vance and the staffing binder. And he never mentioned the apprenticeship placement request in any interview or press appearance. The only reference he ever made to it was that single casual aside to Kara Ellison in the Vanity Fair piece. And even that had arrived so quietly and unremarkably that Kara had nearly cut it from the final draft. He did not appear to want credit for it. This was perhaps the most important part of the whole story. Because in a world that had built vast and glittering infrastructure specifically designed to reward people for performing goodness publicly, for announcing donations, for sharing charitable moments, for turning decency into content, Keanu Reeves had done something genuinely useful and hidden it so thoroughly inside the ordinary logistics of a press tour that it had taken a 17-year-old girl in a school computer lab 6 weeks later to find it by accident. He had not done it to be seen, for he had done it because he remembered what it felt like to need it. Marcus Breil still worked security events in Berlin. By the spring of 2024, he had been promoted to senior coordinator at his firm, responsible now for training the newest intake of apprentices. Young people, first-timers, people who showed up with clipboards and butterflies, and the particular brand of nervous seriousness that belongs to someone who understands that this chance is not guaranteed and does not intend to waste it. And he told them, on their first day, a story. He told them about a cold night in March on Hardenbergstrasse, about a clipboard and a raised hand and a face that his brain had failed to process quickly enough, about a handshake and 4 words spoken quietly at a door. He told it plainly and without embellishment, the way his father had always told stories. Sitting still, no performance, just the facts arranged in their honest order. Then he told them the part about December, and the office in Los Angeles, the staffing binder, the quiet request that nobody had announced and nobody had been meant to find. He watched their faces while they listened. He saw the moment it landed, the particular shift that happened in their eyes when the shape of the whole thing became clear to them, when they understood that the man who had been stopped at the door had specifically arranged for the kind of person who would stop him to be standing there. "Oh, why are you telling us this?" one apprentice asked him once. A young woman named Petra, 19 years old from a small town near Dresden, on her very first day. Marcus thought about it for a moment. He looked at the photograph on his desk, still there, still in its plain frame, the profile shot, the open hands, the patient face. "Because this job will put you in front of a lot of people," he said. "Some of them will be important. Some of them will act like they are. Some of them will treat you like you're part of the furniture." He paused. "And occasionally, not often, but occasionally, you will meet someone who treats you like you matter. Like your presence on this earth is not an inconvenience to be managed, but a fact to be respected." He looked at Petra directly. "I want you to recognize that when it happens," he said. "And I want you to remember how it feels. And because the only thing worth doing with that feeling, the only honest response to being seen by someone who didn't have to see you, is to turn around and see someone else the same way." Petra nodded slowly. She looked at the photograph. Then she picked up her clipboard and went to take her position. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary morning. Buses ran their routes. Coffee shops filled and emptied. People walked to work with their heads down against the wind, carrying their invisible weights, their private griefs, their small and enormous hopes. Each one of them the center of a story that nobody else could fully see. Somewhere in Poland, Sophie Maurer was finishing her final year of school, making plans for what came next, keeping a letter in her bedside drawer and a photograph on her wall. Somewhere in Los Angeles, a man was living his life without any particular need for the world to know what he had done quietly inside it. And in Berlin, Tion Hardenbergstrasse, the Zoopalast still stood on its corner, gold light in its windows, history in its walls, waiting, as all great stages wait, for the next person who needed somewhere to arrive. The door, as it had always been, was open. And that is the story of the night a security guard stopped Keanu Reeves at the door of his own premiere, and how one quiet act of kindness in a Los Angeles office traveled all the way around the world without a single camera pointed at it. Before you go, drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from right now. I want to know. Berlin, Ghana, Bavaria, Los Angeles, or maybe a small town that nobody has ever made a movie about yet. Tell me, because if this story taught us anything, it is that the places nobody is looking are often where the most important things are happening. If this story moved something in you, if it loosened something that was tight, or reminded you of a door that someone once held open for you, or made you want to be the person who holds it open for someone else, please hit that like button right now. Not for the numbers. Because every like tells the algorithm that stories about human decency are worth spreading. And right now, the world could use a little more of that being spread around. And if you want more stories like this one, true stories about ordinary moments that turned out to be extraordinary, and about quiet people who changed the direction of other people's lives without ever making the front page. Subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, come back. We will be here. Now go click the video appearing on your screen right now. I picked it specifically for you. I think you are going to love it. And remember what Marcus Bryle said. It feels like being seen by someone who didn't have to see you. Go make someone feel that today.